4-3-2.
All right. Well, should we call the meeting to order? Roll call?
This is just a work session?
Just a work session, so we don't need to do a roll call on it?
It's not
All
really
right.
meeting, Chris. It's kind of just a
Okay.
open forum discussion in the harbor.
Well-
How things gel.
I mean, I think really what we need to concentrate on is where the harbor overlaps with planning, which is particularly the proposed changes in zoning down along the waterfront. And I think the first thing is, does anybody on the harbor board have any concerns about what's going on? Comments? Let's start there. Yeah.
Well, the thing I get asked all the time is, what's the long-term plan for Pat East Lyman? So, I know you dread that, but it is what I get hit up with daily. And
I think Glow's probably the best one to answer that, but I can kind of summarize from what the discussions we've had is that it's going to be an ongoing thing to try to get the best possible deal from the state before we can really do anything with it. Because we've got, we're dealing with 3 entities of the state as well as, borough-owned land now down there. So we've got really 4 people with interest in Papke's, 4 different groups, and we need to get something that is going to work for the borough if we're going to take over the ownership of that land. And I think it's probably, I think Glow's the one who's been working the most on it, but trying to get the best possible deal for the borough from the state. If we're going to take over that dock, they better give us enough funds to fix that dock properly. Same with the launch facilities and such.
It's looking like a
Glow,
mostly.
do you have anything to add to this?
Well, no, that's spot on. I think, just the borough in itself went kind of on the good faith measure to acquire that property in hopes that, in realization that that is a very important corner of our borough, and kind of went above and beyond, I think, to make that statement publicly and putting money where their mouth was. So I think that right there shows that the borough is pretty sincere about their efforts out there. That being said, like Chris said, there's right now the state has come to the borough and requested a letter be sent from the borough asking the state to consider transfer of the 3 specific locations that are harbor facilities right now that are still under the state ownership. So that letter is being formulated, will be sent, and we'll see how the state handles it.
is there any plan for requesting a conveyance of the ramps from DNR?
From right now, there isn't anything out there that I know of, but I think that it's probably, certainly in consideration, especially if we own property for parking and we at some point own and perhaps upgrade the DOT facility out there, kind of stands to reason that and we've been through that before, so we know the process in transferring state tidelands. We did that out at Scout Bay, so I would think, but that's definitely talked about in your comprehensive plan. A lot of the things that the waterfront master plan suggested are just duplicated in the comprehensive portion of the waterfront. So other than, I don't know if you're thinking of some other specifics on, I think the comprehensive plan suggests that if there's tidelands or if there's waterfront discussed in the future for development or for zoning, that it does include the harbor board's conversation. And I think that's the biggest cornerstone that we have.
And one of the things I think that's laid out in the proposed zoning maps in here is that there are certain sections of the waterfront that have real importance to harbor, and that we need to really consider how that land is being used when somebody comes to us and says, hey, I want to do this, and does that really fit with the direction that the borough wants to go? So, you know, how they're using it now is fine, but if they say they want to put a high-rise condominium building right down, you know, someplace that is really important to harbor, that's probably not the best fit. So we need to make sure we address that as far as the planning end of things. It's kind of what the documents say.
And it encourages the harbor board's participation at that level.
Right.
Currently, the way it many times goes, and it's kind of just been planning and zoning's, you know, extending the hand of friendship or whatever, to say, hey, if we're talking about rezoning, or we're talking about doing some things along the waterfront, allowing certain things to happen up Hammer Slough, or allowing certain things to happen that are outside the auspice of what the actual zoning suggests, they do oftentimes send it to the harbor board for a review and a comment, but they don't have to. And what this document suggests is that they encourage the continuing of that, and perhaps even that it is a must that it goes through the harbor board. You know, when you have things like somebody wanting to put a bed and breakfast in a prime piece of industrial waterfront, those kind of things, that this document says you should run it through the harbor board, and I think that.
Well, and even when it comes to the planning commission recommending leases on property down there, that we kind of run them through the harbor board to make sure the lease really fits with the direction of the harbor before we recommend that to the borough assembly. That way we're kind of on the same page, we're working together. So.
And if you take some time also to look through what they are suggesting in kind of the different explanations for the zoning of the future, you know, whether it's commercial or what are those kind of things, there's some different levels of what they encourage to be allowable. And of course, the ones of interest to the harbor board are the ones along the waterfront. Say, you know, that there would be, and I don't know what page that's on, but they're pretty specific on what they would encourage development to include or not include. You know, housing, residential housing, you know, uplands of specific areas. And they show that on that zoning map that's included in that comprehensive plan. You know, there's also reference, I think you probably remember a conversation about historical districts, up Hammer Slough, down the Singley Alley, that maybe we go as far as to tell people the only things you can do with your land is this. And I know it's a touchy thing, but there are also some language that, and this is all just encouraging the borough to consider this. This isn't, you know, now it's law, but this is what this plan suggests should be the way these are the things we should talk about.
And that specifically, that we've got certain areas that are really important for the harbor. For instance, for the industrial part of the harbor, there are certain areas of property that are important as far as like along North Nordic, where it's important to keep that open and more of a public land space along the water there. So, but you know, particularly that we're setting aside, okay, these areas, this is what we think the really best use for that land is. So,
Yeah, Chris, does the planning and zoning have a framework for zoning or planning outside of district or service area 1, or got a framework for that?
all this recommends is, right now, this is the way we see the land in these areas being used, and this is kind of the direction we see it going. But that's all this document really says. Outside of service area 1, there's some limited. You know, it's like they're saying, okay, this area down in Papke's seems to be more of a rural village type thing is what's developing down there. But that's all as far as it goes. It's not saying this is what the zoning's going to be. This is what we see is happening right now. But for us to go to a level of doing zoning, that has to go through a whole public hearing process. That has to be all, something that's really involving the people within that area. And that's kind of what the document states. So,
I got a, oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
yeah.
You beat me.
Okay, I have one concern. Back when I was on the utility board and we purchased the property from Reeves for the South Substation, our opinion at that time was that in the future, there seems to be an effort for liquefied petroleum coming to this area. And one reason that we selected that was because on the north side of where it was Northland then, but it's Sampson now.
Yeah.
But that specific area, you could bring a barge in, and we had planned a pipeline coming across, and there was room for tanks to store liquid petroleum, and then we'd have natural gas for the city. That was one thing we considered, and I hate to see if there's land selection along because of the highway there. I think it would be important maybe to consider land selection for an area there large enough to bring in a barge and liquefied petroleum. If you don't think that liquefied petroleum is going to be a thing of the future in this area, then that plan wasn't any good. And the other thing is Tonka. And I think Tonka, there's a lot of potential to development, especially with the road systems going to the southeast on that, and a lot of sun, and there's a lot of influence in this community talking about making farming and things like that, raising cattle, raising sheep, goats, and those things. And I think that in the land selections, we should consider, I believe, Tonka. That area right around.
That would actually help keep the road funding going to the Tonka system. Because I'm having to retract from outer places for funding road.
But that system is all built and everything. We talked about biofuels that could be made, but there's a lot of fuel over there at Tonka and everything. But and there's grants and funding for bioplants. But the immediate future, I think it would be important. I see that liquefied petroleum is going to be an economic fuel for Southeast, and we had selected that on the old utility board had selected that, and that's why we bought that property there.
I think the land that you're talking about right across from the substation there.
Yeah,
north,
the land right across from the
I
substation.
think that's in private hands right now. I'm not sure who the
Well, the
ownership
state
is on
would
that.
still own
Okay.
the state owns the highway,
Yeah.
and so far out to mean high tide.
Yeah, I
But
don't know
then
what
mean
that
high
is.
tide out was still state, I think.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I just believe that that's something,
Yeah, I don't know what the ownership on
you guys are the harbor, but that's just one of my ideas. And the other thing that I thought was important, and I just bring it up, especially for the divers, from the power plant over here, we have 4 cables running across where the Sakine comes out. One was a spare. Now, and the last time I think that they dove along that, because the current out of the Sakine, all the Canadian activity, all of this stuff that's going on, the channel keeps changing. And those cables were actually suspended in the air in places because the current had changed and pulled stuff out. And the thing is that's serious is we could lose one and still keep going. But if you lose two, like trees or something, because the Stikine is changing, if you lose two, those are special made cables. Specially made, they're not stock. And the time to have one built, at that time, we investigated, it takes a year. So that means that we'd be running on diesel power here for a year. And that's why we considered that area, for a backup. And the EMDs that we bought, these over here, were planned to go out there. Well, the EMDs, they will burn natural gas and diesel fuel. The new one that Nelson bought, he said, I didn't realize that. But he bought the thing at the ferry system that's from Sweden, and that hardly runs, but that won't run on natural gas.
So when you say liquefied,
Liquefied petroleum
What
and
is that?
natural gas, yeah.
what is liquefied petroleum? Just
Like,
diesel fuel?
Liquefied natural gas. I mean, they
Yeah.
pressurize it so much it turns into.
They
Okay.
liquefy,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think in the north, that's what I think you'll see in the future, I think you'll see somebody, whether it's the South Koreans and the Japanese, somebody's going to put $50 billion in the plant up there and start liquefying petroleum. And if that happens, the southeast here could gain tremendously by having natural gas for everything. And that was just a key area that we had picked out, and that's why we bought that property there.
So you need a tank farm for that.
Yeah, but there's room enough. Yeah, there'd be a big tank up on this thing, and the barge could come in and the pipeline across and fill the tank up behind. But we had it all laid out where that substation was.
That'd be a good thing for the land selection committee
Yeah,
to address, and Joe Nelson.
Yeah.
yeah.
Then the power, Juneau's about out of power. If we lost those cables, you can't get power up from Ketchikan. They're out of power. Juneau's out of power. The only people that have a tremendous amount of power in the whole of Southeast is Petersburg, Thomas Bay, and whatever. But that's extremely expensive to develop, hydro plants and stuff like that. But there could be a disaster, and we'd be running on diesel fuel for. I just
Well,
want
it's
to bring
something
that
land
out to consider.
Land selection should probably
Yeah,
look
the
into
land
it.
selection.
Is this something that you want to develop?
What
The conversation about this?
I think it's something that we should mention to land selection, but it's not really something that,
Well,
No.
maybe talk about Cascade Creek. What about land there?
yeah,
You talking about that?
we can,
About-
yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a source of a huge amount of electricity that could be developed. So is there a land selection that could happen in that?
That
satisfy that?
I'm not familiar with, so I can't really answer on that.
I'm on the land selection committee, and
Yeah.
there's very little land offered to us that is of value for power development.
Yeah,
But with that said, there is going to be some negotiations with the state, and that's one of the places that we looked at, is the Cascade Creek area.
I could see that being developed and then power going north as well. And Juneau's looking at another source right now, I understand.
Yeah, they are.
It's just
So-
that, like I was saying, that the selection was offered, the land that's offered to the borough is only around 1,300 acres, and so it's, you could use that up pretty quickly, just
Yeah.
picking out, key places, and places that the state does own, they're not offering a lot of it to us.
Yeah.
I think mental health and the university took the best available state lands.
Mhm.
Well, is it important for the borough to be involved in, if there was development of the Cascade Creek for hydropower? I mean, is it important that the borough select land even, or would that be another entity that did that?
Well, I think a lot of that land over there is federal, so it's not even available by
not.
the state. So the land selection doesn't need to take place on lands that would be developed for power, for instance, because you could just lease it from the state. You wouldn't have to use up your selection
Right,
acreage.
right.
And so that's kind of what we're looking at. But there's a lot of questions that we're going to be asked of the state to find out where the borough stands as far as what we can obtain. But there is a lot of waterfront that's not developable that they offer us. Like out in Frederick Point East, there's some real steep lands that are,
Yeah.
like, why would we want that?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is a lot of the land that the state has available, their best lands they're not offering, and the stuff that they are offering is stuff that the borough really doesn't want. So
There is a waterfront that could be of value to the borough out at the Olson's Log Dump. And that's why I was concerned about the reach of the planning and zoning for how they would have zoning requirements out there. When we don't really have any kind of set plan for.
right now,
what we can
there's
do.
really just a suggested zoning that's in here. Out in that area, it's kind of suggested, this is how we see the land being used and what we see at this point, but it really is kind of being left open, although one of the things it does recommend in the document is that the borough assert some desire to be able to have platting authority out there, so that way when somebody goes and subdivides a lot, that we have a right to go in and say, hey, look, you need to make sure you provide proper easements on this. You need to make sure you're providing proper access to these lots, because a lot of times what'll happen is somebody will go in and subdivide it. They're not putting in any road access to those lots, even though the bulk of it's on a road system. And so what ends up happening is substandard roads get built into there, and then the borough ends up having to try to maintain those roads, and it ends up being a disaster. We're seeing that with down at Papke's right now with substandard roads down there that then the borough's plowing snow on and damaging snow plows. So we kind of need to come in and say, hey, look, if you're doing a subdivision, you got to put in a decent access road that meets the borough standard, so then the borough can actually maintain access for people.
And then simultaneously,
yeah.
it recommends that that same thing goes forth from the borough on all borough property.
Right.
So that'll probably be
Yeah.
that'll be like, we did it, so we expect you to do it.
Right.
Follow our rules, and then you have a leg to stand on.
And then the other thing is to make sure that, when a subdivision is put in, that even if there's no power out in that area at the time, that there's easements for utilities put in, because that's one of the problems right now with some property in the borough already, is that there's no easement to get power to certain lots. And that's creating a real headache for those property owners. And so we need to make sure that when somebody subdivides something, it doesn't create future headaches for the borough and for the property owners. So that's kind of part of doing this. The other thing is to keep people subdividing from doing too small lots out in, say, a rural area where people are going to be relying on septic systems. And when you have too small of a lot, it makes it very difficult to put in any sort of treatment system or deal with your runoff water. If you got water running off onto your neighbor's lot and causing all kinds of problems, then it's going to be an issue. So part of it is to say, for the borough to be able to say, okay, look, this is a minimum lot size you've got to do out in the rural areas. These are the minimum requirements for putting in, easements and access to property and such, so that there's, it's preventing us having headaches in the future, is what we're trying to say. So there will be some bit of authority from the borough to say, yeah, you got to do this if you're going to, you say they select land out there and want to subdivide it and do things out of it. There's got to be a minimum standard of how things are addressed.
And once again, this document suggests all these things.
Yeah.
And we just advise, you
Yeah.
advise planning and zoning, the harbor board advises planning and zoning then advises the borough. The borough can choose to adopt this with
Right.
the changes that we've kind of been doing at all these little subcommittee meetings. And then all it does is it outlines a process. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be implemented. All of the things
Right.
that Chris talked about still have to go through the public process to get there. But this document is giving us a revised new version of a comprehensive plan that has always been. This is just an updated version of it. So again, from the Harbor Board's perspective of why they're here is, I just handed you out a little bit of the draft on pages 34 through 37 that just explains those categories that they're talking about, using, implementing, and any future expansion or even some of the existing. Again, just suggesting these be considered. And in particular, of course, with the Harbor Board, I would suggest that Chapter 3, which has to do with the land use, would go hand in hand with Appendix B, that you can find this on the website. Appendix B is the proposed general land use maps. And so then using these categories in this little handout that's available on online as well, you can kind of go through and see where some of these future properties, they encourage us to look at that this would be the land use, and here are the categories, starting with waterfront, A, B, and C, and what those specific areas are prioritized to use from their perspective. And Chris and I have been at this for a year, and so we've had a real, we've had a hand in helping author this. So I feel pretty good about these subcategories and when the borough goes forward and looks at zoning these future areas, these are the things that they need to consider. Also, Chapter 4 is public facilities, which they've identified the area like you were talking about, John, at Pappy's. Chapter 7 has to do with recreation, and Chapter 8, economic development. So those are the things that if you wanted to really take a moment and take a look at and comment upon, fly that flag, that commenting period is open until the end of January. So if you submit your own personal public comment to planning and zoning, you can be heard outside of this little committee meeting that we're having right now, which is generally for the public to show up. And I don't know that we have anybody here from the public, but just to just kind of reiterate why we're here.
Chris?
Do you have any other? Yeah.
Yep.
Mike?
Just from the Harbor Board's perspective, I think that we would like to keep an open dialogue whenever there's not only zoning development, but variances
Yeah.
on the waterfront.
Well, conditional use permits, variances, any of that sort of thing. I definitely think that if that comes up on waterfront lots, that it's something we as planning need to say, hey, we need some input from the Harbor Board as to how they feel about this before we, as the Planning Commission, make a decision. So it's kind of the same thing. It's been brought up a couple times when we accept something for that has to do with borough property. We had a few times where we're dealing with things in borough right-of-way recently, and we always try to request from Carl, okay, how does the borough feel about this? Same thing with something with waterfront. I would say that when we accept it, we ask Harbor Board, how do you guys feel about this? So,
And the comprehensive plan update does suggest that we
Yeah.
do that, and hopefully
Yeah.
the
Because I mean-
assembly has a final say.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
hopefully, you're mentioning that will just reiterate.
but as far as variances and conditional use permits or anything that's down in those areas along the waterfront, I think that Planning Commission should just say, how does Harbor feel about this before something goes forward? Or even if recommending a lease, we should throw it up before you guys and say, what do you guys think about this? So, I mean, it's perfect timing for us to do it, because we usually have to accept this at one meeting, and then we have a public hearing at the next meeting. So when we accept it, we could request from Harbor at that point that you guys weigh in before our next meeting, and then we can have something to go on when we have our discussion. So,
Since the planning and zoning has a little bit more power than the Harbor Board, I provided to Liz the approval of the waterfront master plan, which goes hand in hand with the comprehensive plan. And there were 3 specific things that the Harbor Board requested changes. And so I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't seen that yet.
Okay, well, I could read them quickly.
Yeah.
The number 1 was on page 18, paragraph 4, combining 2 of the sentences to read that the borough residents generally rely on local resources, harbor revenues, and state matching funds to finance harbor capital projects. Before, the way it had listed it was that it alluded that the borough had a hard time borrowing for projects and all that kind of stuff, even though we're in the middle of a loan, for the harbor right now. So we kind of brought those 2 sentences together, clarify a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then chapter 5.5, Scow Bay Haulout and Washdown Facility. It went into kind of a long paragraph about exactly identifying what specifically should be put there, and we reduced it to say that as a medium priority, the Harbor Board should construct a new ramp at Scow Bay, rather than this whole, all this language. And then chapter 6, financial consideration summary, sentence 5 should read, implementing an annual rate increase of an inflation rate plus 2% over the next 10 years would provide additional revenues to allow the Port and Harbor Department to grow a replacement fund balance to recommend balance of 4.0 million. Over the long term, and there was just we felt like there was a word missing, and so I added that word of 10 years.
Yeah.
And so those were the specific things that they saw that should be changed, and then turned over to you to adopt the proposed waterfront master plan. So
Okay.
Liz has it,
Yeah.
but if you could put that as part of your recommendation when you send it up.
Okay.
Up the chain.
Yeah.
I still have my hand up.
Certainly. Go right ahead.
That was back when we were discussing Pappy, so that's what I'm back to again. The comprehensive plan is, every 10, 15 years that we come up with this, so.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the purpose of this meeting, is to discuss that comprehensive plan. Does anybody, such as the borough, the harbor board, the planning and zoning, have any envision of the Papke's facility? What would be a best case situation there for management, funding, et cetera? And we talked a little bit about the conveyance of the ramps from DNR. That process did take over 10 years, I think.
20 years.
Okay, 20 years. So hopefully we'll speed that up a little bit. Yeah, but still, it's a very long-term process. So wouldn't it be timely to start considering a conveyance of that, if that's the direction we want to go? But so far, nobody's really come up with any directions. And that's
I think
my concern.
You've been working on this to some degree.
Yeah, and I guess probably, we've all been kind of standing around, like you say, John, just waiting for somebody to make the first move. And I think the borough did make the first move in buying that property. The second move will be in the borough trying to, acquire the Papke's facility, and they're in the process of doing that. So I think the borough is out ahead of everybody, trying to facilitate something happening out there. Now, the the plan, the comprehensive plan suggests, and I believe the borough's document, what's that called, suggests that, charter suggests that there are service areas considered for that location. And that will be probably where the rubber, meets the road, when we talk about who's going to be in charge of it. Right now, the borough is taking all the steps to show process out there, but at some point, that's going to be the real, in my book, that's going to be the real conversation that happens.
Dave?
I think service areas and harbors are going to be difficult items to discuss.
Yeah.
So should we make all the harbors that are in service area 1 the responsibility of service area 1 and not the borough-wide? The same, and would that mean that if I'm in service area 2, then I can't use a harbor in service area 1 or vice versa? So on a public facility like a harbor, if we are a borough, I think it needs to be very clear cut. There needs to be one entity responsible for it, the borough, and whoever is a resident of the borough can use a harbor out of Pappy's, Banana Point, and it just would make it a mess if you tried to go down. I know the intent for the service areas is ultimately to provide a framework so that the people outside of service area 1 can make decisions that affect them directly. But as a longtime user of Pappy's, trust me, the majority of the use comes from people in service area 1. There are very few people that live in what was considered to be the Pappy's area. I can think of one person there's a couple that use it regularly, but most of the people are from town that go out and use it. So that's why I think it's not going to be effective, and I think it's going to create a lot more problems than it's going to solve if we start trying to say service area 1's is responsibility.
Go ahead, Glo.
And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that is going to be a big conversation, because currently the way it's structured, the harbor is structured now, it's an enterprise fund, and who finances the operation of the enterprise fund, the harbor department, are the mortgage users and a few of the leasers and those kind of things. And so that's going to be a big level of conversation that we have right now. It doesn't matter if you live in service area 1 or you live outside of service area 1. If you are a harbor user, you contribute. Whether it's through a launch ramp or it's through a stall or it's through, anything that we have. So that'll be a conversation. At what level does the service area really contribute to the harbor today, and what will that look like after this conversation? And so, encourage the borough to have this big conversation.
One of the things that did come out, and I'm going to bring this up in the conversations with people out at Papke's, and we spoke to a number of the lodge owners. We spoke to a number of people who live out in that area. And one of the things that came up is that there is no opposition to there being users fees for Papke's and having parking stickers on vehicles and saying if you want to park here, unfortunately right now, because it's not borough property, we can't do anything like that. But, if the borough were to put in a parking lot on borough property out there, they could implement it at least for that lot. So, but the lodges are on board with that. They're willing to pay for parking stickers to be able to have parking out there to, use for their vans and stuff. And so are a lot of people who use the boat launch out there. So there's not opposition to doing something like that. So.
And just to follow up on John's question, I think I don't know who starts that conversation. I don't know if it's the users out there that say, hey, we want to upgrade, or if it's the borough that starts that conversation, but somebody will have to, and I encourage it to be had.
Yeah. And they did raise quite a bit of money out there for working on the boat launch and stuff just through passing the hat in this last year. And they did quite a bit of work on the boat launch out there, and on the parking they got DOT to donate a whole bunch of the street grindings from working on the road here, and they spread that out in the parking lot out there. They also dumped, they got a couple loads of rock donated that they dumped off the end of the boat launch to fill in that big hole. So, you know, they've done quite a bit down there, so. Yes, Dave?
I think ultimately it needs to be the borough that takes the responsibility for that. And that's because
Yeah.
of the very confusing land ownership issue out there. You have DNR, you know, and
Well, and
in the past, as a private person, when I've tried to cut through that, dealing with mental health, DNR, and also the Forest Service is mixed into it, they don't want to talk to a private person. They want to talk to somebody like the borough.
yeah,
When it was a city, the city said, well, we have no authority out that area, that's outside the city limits. So to me, that's one of the advantages of forming a borough, is we now have a government entity that the other government entities will communicate with, and then can maybe cut through some of this stuff and maybe reduce the timeline from 20 years down to something
Yeah.
more reasonable, like
Well,
4 or
and-
5.
Well, case in point is the conversation DOT,
Yeah.
they wants to have about Scow Bay and
Yeah.
Kukenoff and Entrance Island. They don't want to talk to, even, they don't really want to talk to the city of Kupernoff. They want to talk to the borough and go through that process, so you're right.
yeah, and I think you've done quite well in dealing with them in the past, so, and I think you're working with them now trying to get it, but I understand dealing with the 3 different entities down there can be a nightmare, so, but I think it is a conversation we need to keep going and see if we can get something worked out.
So I don't know who starts it, John.
Yeah.
I think it's the responsibility of the Harbor Advisory Board and the Planning and Zoning Commission, with, hey, that's us,
Yeah.
to start that conversation. 'Cause this is a timely situation. If you look at the comprehensive plan, they were giving that facility 2-3 years, you know? Then it's gonna be falling into the sea. And so, I think it's time to start.
And you're right, the Harbor Board has put their best foot forward in actually authorizing part of the condition assessment. Now we have proof what is there, we've had engineers look at it, we have a document now that supports replacement or fixing up or whatever. So, yeah.
So how do we start the borough to start doing this?
Well, as far as the Harbor Board goes, they can't come up with topics to just make decisions upon, so I think, you know, it needs to come from the assembly, and probably planning and zoning. I mean, maybe we go and approach the assembly and say, hey, tell us to talk about this.
Well, maybe we should put that on our agendas for both the Harbor Board and the Planning Commission for our next meetings, is that we put together a letter recommending to the Borough Assembly that they start to address the issues of PAPKs. And I don't know if you want to throw in the other facilities as well. But you know, if you think that's the direction we need to go, I think we need to sit down and start drafting a letter and kind of bounce it back and forth between us. Get a letter put together between the Harbor Board and Planning and Zoning that we recommend to the Borough Assembly that they
Have the conversation.
start having the conversation about this. So,
Figure it out.
I agree.
yeah,
I think it's a good idea.
yeah. Yes,
You can always put it as a discussion item on an assembly agenda and present
Yeah.
some information just to sort of lay the groundwork and then, you know, fill in
Yeah.
over time.
It might be, you know, it might be a little bit proactive, but maybe a little bit ahead of the game because the letter has just been sent. We should get, I mean, I know Muck Election is chomping at the bit to have this conversation. So I think in the next month, we're gonna see a reply, then we're gonna have some numbers on the table, and that discussion, I think, you know, but if you, since you're are you the liaison? Since you're here?
I'm not, but
Yeah.
But you're
you know,
here
but I'm
listening.
definitely interested.
You know,
Yeah.
and maybe you can, you know, hear from us.
Sure.
That the conversation.
yeah, I think we should do it as a formal letter, though, to the Borough Assembly saying, you know, we would like to see you take this action. So that way they've got something to start with.
Or just even a
Yeah.
report.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But,
Chris, I'd suggest that it started out of the Harbor Board, since they're more familiar with the situation than we are on planning and zoning. Of course, I have my own personal bias. I'd be more than willing to write the letter, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I think if you guys could write a letter what you'd like to see
Then we
procedurally
can
from
come
your
over
end, and
and
then we
add
can
it.
You might
endorse
not
it.
like what, though, that
Well,
these
no.
guys have to say.
Oh, you mean, well, which guys? Oh, the Harbor Board? Oh, well.
I mean,
Sure. Well, I
you
mean,
know,
that's-
that's the other thing, so. you
Yeah,
know.
I can understand. I mean, if
It's
the Harbor
not
Board feel.
daunting.
No, I understand. I mean, it's, but, you know, I mean, it's a very important access point for the community. It's used more than any of the other remote harbors, blah, blah, blah. It's economically important. I don't think anybody could make the case that we should just get rid of it, although I'm sure some people could. But, you know, maybe we'll find out this summer what happens when it does go away, because it's pretty close to that point right now. I tell you, sometimes when I tie my boat up there, I wonder, well, maybe is this such a good idea or not?
Yeah.
But,
The question that always comes to my mind when we discuss it is determining who are the people that actually use it. You know, like you say, that it's from Service Area 1 mostly, but if the lodges use it, there's probably hundreds of people that pass over that dock every summer. And I think we have to consider that as far as,
Yeah.
you know, how we're gonna deal with it.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with 2 of the lodge owners out there who said they have no problem. In fact, they were the largest contributors to the getting the work done this during the fall down there as far as finances goes. So, and they have no problem in paying to use that facility. So.
Well, and just as staff, you know, concerning Pappy's Landing, the Appendix C of the condition report tells us what, you know, the value and the replacement figure is, and it's at, you know, kind of the same design that's out there. And they figure it'll cost us, replacement will be 1.2 million. Well, hand in hand, I know that we're not going to get anything close to that as deferred maintenance. We're probably not even going to get half of that for the entire, all 3 projects. So then we have to have the conversation of who is going to foot the bill. Should I raise mortgage rates in order to fund a replacement of that? Should, you know, because Service Area 1 people, well, again, it's not all service area. I mean, I got people that rent stalls in the harbor that don't own property here, are not service area anywhere. They don't, so is it fair to those people? Or is it, you know, do we have a lot of mortgage users using it, or is it just Service Area 1 people? So should we raise property tax and give this to Carl as part of the Public Works? You know, I mean, and if we're not going to replace the facility and have a brand new thing that requires little or no maintenance, I'm going to have to dedicate a certain part of the employee's time out there, which isn't free, you know. And so therefore, when you start picking this cost apart, you know, a public employee is worth about $70,000 to $90,000. You start talking about a 1.2 price tag, and maybe we get a couple $100,000 to offset that. Maybe I can match it for a couple $100,000. Well, maybe at best we're recouping half of it. So now we have to come up. I mean, these are costs that you can't saddle a few lodges out.
Right.
I mean, there's no way. I don't know with the cost to make it the same as what we charge them in town for tying up to the facilities. You're looking at maybe recouping under $10,000, and that wouldn't even touch the maintenance. So those are the conversations that we have to all be prepared to have.
But I think that's maybe.
And that's, you know, I mean, not that we're delving into them now, but those are going to be the topics that need to be covered.
But I think we need to cover, okay, if we replace the facility, this is what we expect the maintenance to be. If we just fix the facility, this is what we expect the maintenance to be. So you kind of have an idea of what the costs are going to be. And then also, you know, what are the fees for, you know, if we were to put parking stickers on charging out there, what would that look like? And for tying up
we
out
don't
there.
charge now, so-
Yeah, but I mean,
I don't know what that would look like.
You have to acquire the mental
Yeah.
health lands, though,
But-
that people park on.
yeah.
You know, I mean,
But I mean, right now the borough does own a lot out there, you know, 3 lots out there, you know, and that's a place to start. But it's not. We don't have parking there yet. but it's something to think about. You know, if we did have the lots, what would it would look like? Because that's the thing you got to start
Right.
saying. Where can we get the money to cover this? Because if it's not forming service areas and increasing taxes out there, then how are we going to fund it? And that's the questions we need to fill
As
in.
well as
Yeah.
management.
Right.
That's the bull in the china shop is management. So I
Yeah.
commend this conversation we're having right now, and I think we need to do more of these. I think we need better collaboration between Harbor Board and Planning and Zoning.
And that is
Let's
verbatim
do
what
that.
what the plan
Yeah.
says, communicate.
Yep.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for being here.
Do you feel that you have something every meeting that we have, or just once in a while that you would need to get together?
I don't quite follow your question.
Well, what I was saying, I mean, you could make a formal request and could be put on the agenda that we address something as you needed to. Or how frequently, or wouldn't that be frequent
I
enough?
don't think it
or-
would be that frequent that we would need to be addressing
See, it would be
issues.
pretty simple if you wanted to get us all together so we could talk like this, to just put it on the agenda.
Well, I think when the need arises, we could set that
Yeah,
up.
and our
Yeah.
meetings are, around 10 o'clock in
Well,
the
I-
morning.
I think it
most of the
it
time.
wouldn't probably hurt to have it kind of one thing, we just bring it up a couple times a year. Is there anything we need to get together, you know, planning commissioners, anything we need to get together and chat with the Harbor Board about? And,
Right.
or the Harbor Board can feel the same way with Planning Commission. If you guys say, hey, we need to get together and chat with Planning Commission about something, you know, you make a request and we do a joint meeting. And we just kind of bring it up twice a year, that is there anything that we need to do this? If there's something that's more pressing, we can always bring it up anytime. But I think we
Yeah.
probably should bring it up a couple times a year and have the option of getting together and saying, hey, is there anything that we need to collaborate on? So,
I think there's a need to meet with the land selection committee as well, this group plus them, because, and fairly soon, because that's getting more and more along the
yeah.
progression there. We need to collaborate with that committee as well.
Okay. We could possibly even do it if it works for everybody, like when the next land selection committee meeting is.
It's going to be the first week in February, I believe. Liz will
Okay.
be back at the end of the month,
Okay.
and then we'll be getting.
Because we could
together
just
after that.
plan to have a little work session maybe after the land selection committee meeting. So, if people are willing to show up for that,
Can't make that.
yeah.
Is land selection committee meetings advertised on public service announcements?
Yes.
Good.
So is this.
Yeah.
I think Dave probably knows as well, just to get back to a quick thing on Papke's, I don't think it's fixable. I've done a lot of repairs to it myself.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah, I have too.
replaceable.
yeah.
I've
Yeah.
taken quite a look at it, and it's the dock is a complete train wreck. So
Well, it was built in the,
Yeah.
I mean, it's lasted a long time. What was that?
It has.
It was built in the 50s?
but it's the
I mean, seriously.
1964.
Oh, okay,
the
well, yeah.
So-
condition,
it's 50 years
the
old.
condition that it's in right now is
Original.
to the point that it would take so much effort to repair it that
Oh,
I'm not
not
sure.
the Mike Luxury. He thinks it's definitely repairable, and it's probably not going to take that much.
It's actually
Well,
Who
And you're
does?
going to see that reflected
Yes.
in the amount of money that.
yeah.
I would like to, excuse me for being late, but I was on another teleconference, and the scope of the issues and the rhetoric that's coming out of Juneau already is quite sobering. So I think we have to realize that whatever we do in the future, we're going to have to pay for it ourselves, we're going to have to maintain it ourselves.
Well, the thing though, that being said, is we just, the Harbor Masters Association just forwarded a legislative, a letter to the legislature saying, please, once again, authorize full funding of the Harbor Municipal Match Grant. and that's 20 million this year. Of course, we know that what the governor's proposed is 100 million total in projects. But he likes, last year he fully funded the Municipal Harbor Match Grant because it's a match. And he sees that that's a good place to use money when you can combine. This would also always, forever and ever, these three facilities, just like the North Harbor, the Middle Harbor, and the South Harbor, have the ability to go through that grant processing, getting 2 for 1 for our dollars. And those are, I'm going to hopefully propose at one of the upcoming meetings that the Assembly again encourage the legislature to fully fund that program. We don't have a dog in the fight this year, but at some point we will again, and it'll probably be for PAFKEYs, and so we need to support Wrangell, Sitka, and 4 other communities that are going through the process today. Those are the things, though, that we have to be, responsive to, that this Municipal Harbor Match Grant needs to stay funded and needs to be exercised annually. And so, yeah, though it is grim out there, there's still, cheerleading we can do from Little Petersburg to encourage the best use of even the state's piddly little 100 million. So, yeah, we have a step up on other program or other facilities with those specific areas. The drive down doesn't qualify, but all the other facilities in our harbor do, because they were originally DOT, and they will either be available for full replacement or for extensive rebuild.
Yeah.
We could essentially go to the state with $200,000 and apply for a Tier 2 grant through that program and get another $200 to do a major fix out there and save that Tier 1, which is complete replacement, to someday down the future when things are a little bit better. And we could, just kind of leverage our money that way. So there's that Municipal Harbor Match Grant, I keep telling everybody, is really a great thing. And it is something we need to exercise as well as. So if there are things that will get us through out at PAFKEYs for the next 5-10 years, maybe that's a wiser way to go today and save our pennies, and then at some point go for the full replacement.
Yeah, the boat launch, I think, is, especially since they poured the concrete and stuff in there, has helped quite a bit.
That will never
Yeah.
qualify.
Yeah. So
Only
that's
the existing DOT.
I'm just saying but the boat launch
That'll have
is
to
not
come out of pocket.
that's not in that bad a shape now that they've worked on it. It's the dock
float.
facility that is the biggest concern out there, I think.
And they did replace all the wood on the walkout.
On the
area.
walkout there, yeah, which
Which
is
is
The
nice.
pier's okay.
Yeah, the pier's fine.
And this engineering, this condition assessment alludes
Right.
to that. They
And
say
then
the problem is the steepness of the ramp and the float
And the float
itself.
Yeah, the floats themselves
So
are failing.
what could we do for 400,000 out there? Say we match it, could we?
You could. I mean, you'd
Those
have
are-
to replace. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you want to come out there, we could.
Oh, I've been there.
Okay.
I know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. There
And
was.
I got engineers proof right
Yeah,
there.
okay.
What would
yeah,
it cost
yeah.
to replace the float out there? Just
Well, that's what this condition
The
assessment
1.2
tells you.
million.
yeah.
The
So-
entire facility would be 1.2. The float itself, we're talking about 480,000.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, if you replace the float, you would probably get hopefully another 50 years out of the facility.
Maybe.
And then, I mean, so $500,000 is cheap when you look at 50 years. Then what you have to do is you have to address your concern, which is obviously how do you maintain it, and that is a concern. And I think anybody that uses, well, I won't say everybody, but I'll say most of the people that I know that use it on a regular basis are more than willing to pay if they have the facility still there.
Certainly.
Who grades the road
DOT.
from the highway
DOT.
all the way down to PAFKEYs?
Yeah, they grade the road all the way down there because the bus slides goes down there and turns around at the bottom of the hill.
Okay.
That is a DOT road.
So-
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing that that I have reservations about the matching thing for repairs is that if we have available cash, we could do it a lot cheaper without having the strings attached to grant money. And because, you know, you have to pay Bacon Davis, and the costs just skyrocket whenever you have to follow those guidelines. So that's something to consider when we're talking about maybe just fixing it.
Right. And we're going to see more and more resistance to getting, I think, from getting money from somebody else that requires real expensive labor and regulation. I mean, if you think back before this started happening, things were done in this town and a lot of volunteer labor. Not that you're going to get that, but you might. But also doing it differently and doing it without those high costs. Otherwise, you can't do it.
Well-
You won't be able to sustain it because you can't raise the rates high enough
Right.
to get the money that you need to do the job.
We're
Yeah.
finding that in the harbor business right now. We're
Yes,
coming
in
to
fact,
the realization
that's
10
what's
years
happening.
after the transfer happened in 2005, when our last harbor was transferred in Service Area 1. Yeah, now all of a sudden, you know, the state hasn't completely abandoned us, but prior to that, if the state owned the facilities, we were responsible for anything under $10,000. Anything over that, they came in, they put us on a list, they came in and fixed it or replaced it or tore it out or whatever they did. And the sad part about it is all of these things that they put in the 60s, right after statehood,
50 years old.
are now 50 years old, and they are not giving us enough money. We just built the North Harbor to the tune of $8 million, and they gave us, to take it off of their hands, 2.3. We grew it with raw fish tax to 3.5. We applied and got a 50% match, and then Power and Light came in and bought their own equipment, and so that's how we pieced that facility together. Had we had to save, you know, another $500,000, we wouldn't have a new harbor right now. We'd have, you know, probably be still patching it together, and then the time being the time, we probably would be we really lucked out there because the borough came together. But there's many ways to skin this cat, and it's a lovely conversation to have, and we need to continue having it, and at some point, hopefully the Borough Assembly will take action.
Is the ramp not on the land that you're getting?
DNR, yes, it's
So
not
That's
on.
So it's
that's
not-
DNR
so we're talking
land that
about
you've got.
ramp?
DOT is the dock facility, DNR is the ramp, and mental health
Right,
is
so
the parking.
talking about launch fees, an issue because you can't get launch fees.
No, I
It's
can't,
just
I
you-
can't charge launch fees.
Yeah.
But you could, if we own the parking lots, you know,
Which-
then we can charge parking fees, even if we don't charge launch fees.
Yeah, but until you get the other parking lots, it won't do anything, because nobody's
Yeah.
gonna park in the other parking lot that they have to pay for,
Yeah.
when the other ones, you know.
Yeah.
And those cost
Yeah.
money to build too. So.
Yeah.
Mhm, yeah.
So that's just something else that is an issue. I mean, because we've got to deal with, there's three parts to this problem. It's not just one.
Is there some way in this land selection that's going on now,
Well, that's
do-
why I mentioned that we
yeah, to
probably
do some
need to
land
coordinate
swaps or something like that? I mean, we have land coming to us as a borough. Mental health has that land that we'd like to have if we're gonna have this facility. Is there,
As well as DNR.
you know, as well as the DNR lands, is there some ways that, I mean, I don't know how this stuff works, but
Yeah.
you can get in
Well,
there
at
and do some
Papke's,
swaps.
what we did is we traded. We traded property up around the airport for the uplands. The tide lands, what we traded for was utilities. The borough put in, the state put in, or we put in utilities up to the airport. And then that's what we got out of the deal. Took it 20 years to the month. It was June 6th at 1:30 in the afternoon that they signed it in 2013, and we applied for it in June of 1993.
The issue at Pappy's has been that mental health, when they selected their lands on Mitkoff Island, they primarily focused on what they thought were prime timber lands, and their interest in Pappy's was to use it as a transfer facility to move their lumber off of the island. A lot's changed since that's happened, so maybe now it might be a better time to enter into that discussion.
The
with
Forest
them.
Service bailed from there because of the safety issues with putting timber in the water there.
Right.
That's why we don't
Yeah.
use it.
Right, yeah, and I mean, I remember the days when they were using it as a log transfer facility, and it worked fine way back when, but there's a lot more use of that facility now than there was then. I mean, so yes, I would say the first step, and that would be the first thing that we need to do, and that's the thing that the borough should do, is enter into that discussion, because all the other pieces cannot really start until that first one falls into place.
And maybe that's the letter that needs to go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should just, I don't know, we got the harbor board
There
here.
you go, you got an assemblyman.
Well,
Ask her to put it on the
Yeah.
conversation.
Mr. Chair, I don't know what the protocol is. We have the harbor board here, we have planning and zoning here. I'd make a motion that we direct the borough to enter into negotiations with mental health to acquire the land, the parking lot at Pappy's.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
And also say, and
I'll
resolve any
second.
other outstanding
Yeah.
plan issues.
I'll second that.
So moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sure.
And
So,
We have a point of order.
Yeah.
We're just a work session, this is an action.
Yeah.
But maybe
It's
you can
recommendation.
turn around and convey the
We can-
message, and maybe our
She's taking notes, you
assemblyman.
Well, we all agree.
we all agree, so,
Yeah, right. So,
I
I
do
mean,
too.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
instead
all
of- instead of
agree.
having official meetings.
So
yeah.
can you bring that up at the
I'll probably go
discussion?
downstairs after this meeting and talk to Steve, so yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And I think the fact that we
Yeah.
own those 3 parcels will help drive that
Yeah.
conversation too, because it will
As well as the
consolidate the
letter,
ownership.
you know, as well as the letter. And it needs just.
Yeah, we
you
just
know,
need to start moving in that direction, so.
Yes, Chris, after you mentioned that
Mm-hmm.
land that you're talking about swapping, I think the harbor board would be interested in entering into discussion of what land it would trade for.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody's brought up to speed, but at our last meeting, we received a letter from DOT because apparently they didn't select enough land for the airport approach over across the road from the dog park. And they need 3.36 acres over there to meet the FAA requirements. And they want the borough to give them an easement, which will allow us to not do anything with that land. They just want us to give them the easement.
They say
And
it's
our-
worth less than $10,000.
Yeah, and
Because it's
For the 3 points right next to the
and
road.
our comment was to authorize Liz to negotiate some sort of a land swap or investigate the possibility with them for that parcel, because they have to have it and they're gonna make it so we can't do anything with it. So
Good trading stock.
so we've got some trading stock available. We suggested, just in our quick conversation, that maybe the parcel right across from the airport terminal would be a nice piece to have. But if somebody else has got something else that would be of more value, that could be considered.
Maybe we should give that land to mental health.
Either that or exchange.
Sorry.
Do a 3-way trade.
So there could be some
See,
trading that
that's
needs
the
to
power
occur.
of the borough, and
Yeah.
that is really, you know, this comprehensive plan, the waterfront master plan, all of these discussions.
Because I don't know if
Facilitating that.
it's this little parcel right down here that they're talking about, that is right in the corner across from the dog park, that they need, because they've got the parcel across from, but it only covers half the width of the runway. And
Alrighty,
so they made a little mistake when they selected their land. So
Well, that's good.
anyway,
Nice. Silver lining.
What amazed me the most on that deal was that the airport or whoever authority said that land was only worth $2,000 an acre. And so
Right
the
next to
parcel, if we made the trade, with them. It's larger than the others, so we'd have to pay them $2,000 an acre for that land right directly across from the airport.
Sounds good.
So, anyway, just something to keep in mind, and that maybe that could be used for some sort of a trading deal with DOT. So, were there any other areas of concern? Any other items you think we need to discuss below?
I don't think so. I think,
So-
you know, I've helped, of course, probably jaded a little bit, but I think the comprehensive plan touches on all of these things and advises us to communicate with each other and come up with some of these decisions, and and it's something that it's an update. We can always update it down the line if we feel things have changed. I think from staff's point of view, I suggest that you send it up to the line and have the assembly adopt it.
I think we still have one more meeting on things to discuss any
Yeah.
final changes and any further input that we've gotten, and then we vote on it. So,
And once again,
but, yeah.
if any of you want more
Yeah.
detail, Chapter 3, 4, 7, and 8 have to do with the harbor.
Yeah.
Appendix B, if you want to have some personal comments, get them to Chris or get them to Liz by the end of the month, and you will be
Maybe
going to the
they
record.
should come to this, on that meeting too, send somebody to.
Yeah, if anybody wants to show up at that meeting, it's the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. So that's our regular meeting time. So
Yeah.
Do you bring cookies?
Me?
Well, you have spoiled them to no end.
It's not as good as a harbor board.
No, you have spoiled them. Get Liz to start taking.
We can't get Joe to do it, I don't know why.
I will if it'll get you guys there.
Kind of expecting cookies out of this joint.
Nancy, are you on planning and zoning now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
well, if there's no further comments or discussion,
I have a comment.
yeah.
So, I was listening on the radio about extending some of the zoning things outside Service Area 1, and it seems like it gets into delicate pre-borough, anti-borough sentiments and stuff, so I think it's really important that it be seen as coming from the grassroots rather than imposed by these advisory boards. So, and the fact that nobody's here as a public person is a little bit, makes me think, well, we're going at least as fast as we need to on stuff like that.
I think our consultants did a fantastic job of, when they had the meetings outside of Service Area 1, of really conveying to people that this is just what we see going on right now and the direction we see things going. And it's still got to go through a whole process of saying, okay, we're going to do zoning out here, and this is the way it's going to look. And that's all got to go through Borough Assembly and multiple public hearings and everything else. It's not something that's going to happen right now. So I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I can see, at least having some general idea that this is kind of working. So it alleviated a lot of concerns, and I think it alleviated a lot of the tension that was initially
Maybe that's why
when the
the
maps
maps
came
came
out.
out here.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So I think because we had all those conversations and we spent so much time talking to people, and there was a lot of participation. It was really good. So, Chloe, you have any comments?
Yeah, no, I think it's suggesting we have conversations and it's not
Yeah.
implementation
Yeah.
right off the bat.
So
But yes, there'll
Yeah.
be some brouhahas, I'm sure.
yeah, and I think if it's done, a lot of like trying to get talking to people out there and saying, okay, where do you really see your little slice of the borough going, and doing it in sections and really talking to smaller groups at a time, it'll go through a lot smoother rather than trying to just do borough-wide, all at once. Because I think it's each little area of the borough has their own flavor of what they really want to see happen in their neighborhood. And I think it's going to be easier to talk to a smaller group about what do you see happening here and what do you want to see happening here than it's going to be to try to do it all at once. So it's going to have to be broken up into little pieces and talk to different sections at a time. It could be all done as a big plan, but done it over a slow period of time, talking to little sections, getting each little area's feel of what they want. That's the direction I see it happening. I don't see it happening in any major hurry. I don't think there's any reason for it to happen in a major hurry. So, yes.
With that in mind, I saw that there's a new subdivision being planted at Papke's at the corner there where you turn off the highway by Mental Health, and I see that there's some lots that are like a half acre.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if they can just do that and sell them off and then without going through the borough?
Right now, yes.
That's what I'm wondering. There might be a need to do
that's the
something about that.
recommendation that's in the plan, though, is that would be the first step, would be for us to exercise plating authority borough-wide.
Subdivision.
So we can do the subdivision, we take over the subdivision authority borough-wide so that they have to go through the borough before they can subdivide something like that. Because, yeah, anybody who's built out in a rural area knows that a half-acre lot's barely big enough to be able to do anything on.
Especially when it comes to sewer.
When you start dealing with something, even the advanced treatment systems take up some space. I believe they want 130 feet of, for a standard house, they want 130 feet of subsurface discharge on those advanced treatment systems. That's a 130-foot long ditch that you have to dig and put in discharge pipe into, in leach fields. So that takes up a lot of space. So.
Well, I'm just wondering if,
Yeah.
it is a timely thing, if
Yeah.
that's going to happen fairly soon. I'm just wondering what could happen. People could end up buying a lot and then
Yeah.
not be able to do anything with it or be stuck. So I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if maybe it's not something we should just let pass for a while.
Yeah, well, I think the actionable item there is, rather than worrying about the zoning part, because that's going to take time, is to address the plating authority, though, fairly quickly, because that's going to be a big issue. Glo, yeah,
I mean, all you have to do is take a look at the map.
yeah,
And there's out the road, on both sides of the highway,
yeah,
there's tons, many acres. And I should point out, it's also most of the prime land in the borough that has been already selected by the university and mental health.
yeah,
And that's been my concern all along, is what Mike alluded to, is that we have and exercise some form of plating authority out the road. Because
Yeah.
if we don't, we're just going to inherit a lot of messes.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's stated very clearly in the comprehensive plan, and that I think it's one of the things that probably Harbor and more so Planning Commission should really encourage the Borough Assembly to take action on very quickly, is to exercise that subdivision authority and say, we want to have a say in this before these subdivisions are platted out.
And a good example of that was how the university, or excuse me, how mental health subdivided the lots above the parking lot of Happy's. I mean, a couple of lots that they platted there, I don't even know how you'd be able to access them. I mean, so basically what they're doing when they're subdividing, they're sitting, I guess, in Anchorage, and they're looking at a map, and they're drawing some lines.
Yeah, I don't think they're looking at the topography
Obviously
or
not.
anything else
Yeah.
when you see some of the way they've platted lots out there.
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, that's something, once again,
Yeah.
when the borough decided to become a borough, that's the responsibility, at least in my mind, of what a borough should do. They should, make sure that, and what it does is it protects the rest of us that already have land out there.
well, it protects people who also are coming in and don't know the area and are saying, I just want to buy a lot, up there, because they have no idea what they're looking at. They look at a map and, this looks good. Well, who knows? They could have a lot that they can't do anything with.
Similar to having building codes.
Yeah.
They're there to protect you.
Yeah.
I kind of noticed a trend of those people out there too, that they're concerned what the neighbor is doing, and they're asking for some kind of protection, some kind of regulation. And I see that trend growing. More and more
And
people.
I think you'll see more of that, especially if they're making more of these smaller lots. When you start going to smaller lot size, what your neighbor's doing on their lot is a lot more of a concern to you than when you've got, a bigger lot. So,
That's what I was kind of getting at, what Dave was saying
Yeah.
there. If when I see people, what I've been hearing for so long is the borough wants to make us
yeah,
do this to our septic systems. And if you're saying, hey, I don't want a non-functional septic system next door to me,
Yeah.
that's more what I want to hear is like this, people want this, not people don't want this, so.
With that subdivision, if I may interject, if you remember those 4 lots?
Yeah.
That they're the subpar size, that are half acre, they're kind of in the middle of that thing, so they're all 4 lots together. So
Yeah.
you'd have 4 small lots with 4 separate septic systems on it.
Oh,
Imagine,
jeez.
how is that gonna work out? And I talked to, when we saw the size of those lots, I called DEC and I says, do you have a minimum sized lot that you can put a septic system on? And they said, no, we don't regulate size of lots. We go by individually engineered systems,
Yeah.
They'll approve an engineered system if it can fit on your lot.
Yeah.
They'll approve it, of course. But if you got 4 of these on one, it's kind of a really, that
Backed up to
subdivision
each other.
is questionable.
Nice.
how it's laid out.
Maybe you could just have septic lots.
The nice,
Yeah, maybe they could combine and have all 4 be one big
Yeah,
septic
one
pool in the
big
middle of it, I don't know.
the nice thing is the advanced treatment systems do quite a fantastic job of treating the waste. They're actually rated in the state of Alaska. You can surface discharge with those things. They're clean enough, the output on them. The problem, though, is you can't surface discharge in the wintertime around here. You end up with a sheet of ice on your property.
If they're
yeah.
if they're working
Yeah.
properly.
If they're
Because
working properly.
there's an electric
Yeah.
component to it.
No, there's a
Yeah.
tremendous electric component to them.
Yeah,
They're
I'm familiar with that,
Yeah.
and they don't continue to work without.
Well, the thing is, they're supposed to be inspected annually to make sure that they're functional and everything else. And DEC doesn't really, regulate that all too much. So that's the problem.
Because that costs money too.
So, that might be, a real concern. But still, when you're talking a lot that small, even you start putting a driveway in, you build a building on it, you put in a septic system, and then you've got all that runoff going, especially on that flat upper ground there at Papke's, where's the water going to go? It does rain around here. So, just from runoff from the buildings and stuff, where's your water going to go? So you're going to have floods going across your neighbor's property. It's going to be a mess. So that's the other consideration with a small lot like that. So.
Yeah, that would be terrible to be inundated with your neighbor's sewage.
Yeah.
Even your own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think you care about that.
Yeah.
Cleaning a toilet's a lot worse when it's been used by somebody else than by yourself.
Shall we adjourn?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Let's get in the weeds a little bit.
Well, I think it can be said about small lot sizes.